Dawn comes slowly. The light is still shy. The world hasn't raised its voice yet. Close your eyes for a moment and let your body arrive where you are. Feel the weight of your own chest held by your hands. Notice the cool air coming in, the warm air going out. Perhaps behind your commitments and your impeccable schedule, there is a fatigue that sleep hours don't explain. It's a deeper, discreet exhaustion that hides behind phrases like, "I'm fine, just tired," but inside, it whispers something else. "I keep functioning, but I've lost my north." If this touches you, breathe with me now. Without hurry, brief pause. There are days when life feels like a corridor that's far too long. Notifications, demands, multiplying tasks, polite conversations, and inside, a quiet space asking for meaning. It isn't laziness, it isn't ingratitude, it's longing for direction. You do, deliver, solve, fulfill. But the throbbing question, "for what?" still has no answer. I see you. I recognize the courage it takes to keep going when the legs of the soul are tired. And I also recognize the discomfort of feeling that joy, when it arrives, lasts only a moment, like a glass of water before an ancient thirst. There is nothing wrong with wanting relief. The mistake is believing that relief alone satisfies the hunger for purpose. Before we continue, allow your body a simple care. Inhale while mentally counting to 4, hold for 4, and exhale for 6. Do this cycle 3 times with your eyes closed, letting your shoulders drop a millimeter with each exhale. When your exhale lengthens, the body understands a message of safety. The heart slows, the vagus nerve thanks you, the mind finds ground. It isn't magic, it's biology serving your practical spirituality. Your physiology can be a bridge. When the body calms, consciousness can listen. Listen to what? Listen to what life is asking of you, and not only what the world is demanding from you. Viktor Frankl invites us to look at suffering from another angle. Meaning isn't anesthesia, it's direction. It isn't about eliminating all pain so that life can begin, but about discovering that a chosen attitude, aligned with values, can inaugurate meaning in the midst of pain. It's a gentle yet radical shift. From "why is this happening to me" to "how can I respond to this truthfully?" Between what happens and how you respond, there is a space. In that space dwells your innermost freedom, the freedom to choose your stance. When that freedom wakes up, the crisis doesn't stop being hard, but it stops being a judge. It becomes a setting where your value can appear. This gathering is a safe harbor for anyone who needs to remember there is still a compass inside the chest. We'll walk through ideas and practices born from the meeting between consciousness and responsibility, spirituality and emotional neuroscience. Nothing here promises shortcuts. What's proposed is one step at a time, one verifiable gesture per day, a small commitment to what you hold sacred. There will be metaphors to spark images, questions to mature decisions, brief silences to let your own wisdom answer. We're not seeking a perfect life, we're seeking an axis. And when the axis appears, even the storm looks different. Maybe you are crossing grief, separation, a diagnosis, debt, silent company for 2, or simply that emptiness that eats away at the edges where no one can see. Maybe you've tried many things: more work, more distraction, more shopping, more Monday promises. And perhaps, at the end of the day, the bed feels like an island where you land without landing. I don't come to blame you for any of this. I come to honor how human it is to look for relief when the chest hurts. At the same time, I come to offer a question that changes the root because it changes the source. What is life asking of me today? Not tomorrow, not when everything improves, not when guarantees return. Today. What is life asking of me today? The spirituality that matters is the one that fits in your routine. The honest decision in the grocery line, the quiet care for someone who never shows up on social media, the well-done work even when no one applauds. This is where neuroplasticity also works in your favor. Repeating a small choice aligned to a value you hold opens a new trail in the brain, and new trails change old paths. A longer breath before answering, a yes spoken with presence, a no spoken with respect, a gesture of service without witnesses. Little by little, the inner house reorganizes, and the outside starts receiving different responses. Know this: you are not broken. You are in transformation. It's not what happens outside, it's what vibrates inside. Life never becomes unbearable from circumstances alone. It becomes unbearable when we forget the meaning that moves us. And meaning, however hidden it may seem, can be found again when we name the highest value and set it walking in the body, in the voice, in the calendar. It's quiet work, like shifting the spring of a river by millimeters, but miles ahead, the course is different. Today, here, that millimeter begins. While the music breathes, place one hand over your heart and the other over your abdomen. Say quietly to yourself the name of a value you do not negotiate: truth, tenderness, courage, justice, loyalty, faith, gratitude. Feel the word resonate within you as if a discreet doorbell were ringing at home. This will be the guiding thread. Whenever the mind wanders, return to it. Whenever the pain asks for shortcuts, return to it. Whenever anxiety rushes your hands, return to it. This value will be the compass when the map is torn. Along this journey, you will recognize pains you may have carried for years. You will untangle common confusions, like mistaking happiness for meaning. You will discover that anxiety can become mission when it finds a track. That true freedom isn't the absence of limits, but a chosen response. That the wound, when welcomed, points to vocation. That pleasure has a place, but does not replace purpose. That greatness lives in the ordinary, and that quiet inner changes prepare consistent external changes. Not because someone said so, but because you will experience in yourself, with verifiable gestures, the coherence between what you believe and what you do. When the map tears, the first reaction is often to speed up, as if velocity could compensate for lack of direction. The body keeps following automatic routes. The calendar stays full, answers arrive on time, and still a different kind of tiredness spreads. It isn't the weight of the hours, but the void between them. Productivity without purpose produces noise on the outside and silence on the inside. And that silence isn't peace, it's a plea. An old plea for a north. On days like this, the mind seeks explanations, compares paths, collects advice, while the soul quietly asks for something else, an axis. The axis doesn't eliminate complexity, but it organizes the crossing. That's why, in Frankl's view, meaning isn't anesthesia, it's direction. It doesn't promise clear skies, but offers a compass in the fog. Confusing meaning with constant happiness often wounds those who most seek an honest life. When joy falters, a hasty conclusion is born that something is wrong. Yet there is a delicate and decisive difference. Happiness is a state. Meaning is an orientation. States vary with the day's weather, with the memory of a song, with the turn of a conversation. Orientation remains like magnetic north that doesn't depend on the traveler's mood. Perceiving this difference brings a mature relief, almost a rest from the inside out. It's like discovering that emotional stability need not come from the absence of storms, but from the presence of a direction good enough to cross them. Frankl also shines a light on a common mistake, imagining that life starts again when pain ends. Human experience, however, shows another possibility. Life can restart within pain from a chosen attitude. Attitude here is neither pose nor performance. It's an intimate commitment to a value recognized as true. When a person chooses to respond from that value, something reorganizes. Suffering doesn't become a romance. It isn't romanticized, but it finds context. And when pain finds context, it stops being pure weight and begins to point toward direction. The question changes, the breath changes, the step changes. The circumstances remain difficult, but they no longer command the meaning. In concrete daily life, this direction can be recognized in three simple and profound axes: project, encounter, and posture. Project as something to build. It need not be grand. It can be born of the small, the handmade, what fits on today's table. A book can begin as a paragraph. A career change can reveal itself in a night course. A healthcare shift can gain body in a short walk that earns a place of honor in the day. Encounter as someone to serve, a gesture of presence where before there was only obligation, an ear that listens without hurry, a word that settles instead of imposing, generosity offered without witnesses, and posture as a chosen attitude, courage when fear tightens the throat, honesty when convenience entices, kindness when bitterness asks for the stage. 3 simple axes. 3 axes sufficient to sustain the compass when the map is no help. Emotional neuroscience speaks to this perspective elegantly. When attention chooses a value and feeds it with small, consistent actions, circuits strengthen, salient shifts, and what once mattered little becomes central in perception. It's like tuning an old radio. The static still exists in the air, but your hand learns to find the frequency that matters. The nervous system recognizes safety, not when everything is right, but when there is predictability in the gesture that repeats. Not predictability of outcomes, but of intention. A coherent intention, repeated in modest acts, reorganizes the house within. And a reorganized house supports longer crossings. The image of a compass helps because it doesn't require perfect maps. Maps are useful, but they age. The compass, when it points to a higher value, retains usefulness even in the fog. In seasons of collapse, that difference saves. It won't always be possible to anticipate curves, predict costs, avoid detours. Still, when the value is named and warmed, choices gain texture. Instead of which way is faster, emerges which way best honors what I refuse to betray. That question changes the destination, but before that, it changes the way of walking. The body notices, shoulders drop a bit, the gaze aligns, the step finds rhythm. There is no spectacle, there is presence. The everyday offers countless places for quiet proof. In the hard conversation with someone you love, a chosen posture turns confrontation into encounter without denying the truth. At work, the small project, the one no one notices, returns dignity to the craft through well-cared-for detail. In traffic, in line, in waiting, the encounter happens with your own patience, your own humanity, your own limit. There is no glamour. There is effective rigor. And over time, this effective rigor lays track for the soul itself, track for the next rain, track for when the headwind insists, track for when external maps say little. Some stories of overcoming begin with great events. Others are born of small gestures repeated until they grow large inside. The father who decides to be honest about fear and thus teaches courage to his daughter. The woman who turns a grief into presence alongside those crossing losses, offering hot tea and an ear that doesn't trample. The professional who renounces cleverness to embrace quiet excellence, even without applause. These stories rarely show up on social networks, but they nourish the fabric of the world. When embodied, value doesn't need a showcase, it needs fidelity. Some hear this proposal and say, "But I don't feel strong." Strength often doesn't precede the gesture, it's born from it. The decision comes small, almost timid, and yet it inaugurates something larger than itself. Each time a person draws near to their non-negotiable value, the inner compass gains confidence. Confidence doesn't depend on guaranteeing the future, it depends on honoring the next step. Step by step, the map may come back into being, but even if it takes time, the compass already allows you to walk. And walking with a compass, even slowly, is better than running without a north. When life cuts the map, the question that imposes itself isn't how to fix the paper, but how to hear the direction already inscribed within. The silent exhaustion that accompanies productivity without purpose loses power when it recognizes a project with a human face, an encounter that restores meaning, and a posture chosen despite fear. Suffering need not disappear for life to begin again. It transforms when it receives an aligned response. And then, even in the fog, the needle points. The needle points to the highest value. The needle points, and the body learns to trust. In that learning, the crossing acquires a name, and collapse becomes a setting, not a destiny. There are days when the mind races before the body even gets out of bed. The chest anticipates problems, the breath shortens, the hands reach for the phone as if reaching for air. On the outside, everything sounds urgent. Inside, something slowly chews at the edge of your spirit. It's a quiet emptiness that doesn't scream. It eats away lightly, drains the color from small joys, turns simple tasks into tired climbs. This isn't just an excess of demands. There's a why without an answer, and that's the well from which anxiety drinks. The clock dictates hurry. The soul asks for meaning. Hurry tries to silence the question with speed. The question insists, returns at the next corner, returns in the next email, returns in the silence of the shower. The idea that purpose descends like lightning tends to tire more than enlighten. While you wait for the great revelation, the day passes, and real life demands bills, care, decisions. The image of a grand epiphany, though beautiful, often creates paralysis. If it isn't magnificent, then it isn't purpose. Frankl points another way, less showy and more true. Discovery happens on the ground of concrete responsibility. Responsibility here doesn't weigh like guilt. It organizes like a clearing. When something or someone asks for an honest and possible response, the person finds themselves called by a simple name: to be present, to care, to build, to sustain, to repair. Thus, mission ceases to be a stage and becomes a path revealed as you walk it. When anxiety imposes itself, the usual question is, what do I want from life? And though legitimate, that question sometimes tightens the knot. Personal desire matters, but it can become a maze when confused with control. The shift begins when another question emerges, more humble and at the same time stronger. What is life asking of me today? Today, not in theory. Today, not in the fantasy of a flawless future. This question grounds. It pulls the person out of the bog of generic wanting and places them in a committed listening. There's a specific request insinuating itself in daily life. Finishing a job with integrity, offering quiet care, speaking a truth with tenderness, learning something that opens possibilities, putting your feet on the ground so the mind finds footing. In this change of axis, the body thanks you. Anxiety without a track spills energy in every direction. Mission with a track channels that power toward a direction. The engine image helps. A loose engine makes noise, vibrates too much, burns fuel, heats up without leaving the spot. When it finds a track, power serves a destination. Neurobiologically, something similar appears. When the system finds meaningful focus, attention stops wandering through 1,000 hypothetical threats and begins to favor what has value. The circuit of excessive worry yields space to the circuit of coherent action. It isn't magic elimination of symptoms, it's a reallocation of energy, and energy that finds meaning becomes movement with quality. There's a simple path that helps turn restlessness into direction. First, give the pain a name, not a technical name, a human one. Loneliness, uncertainty, fear of losing, fear of not being worthy, longing, tired of holding everything. When pain receives a name, it stops being a monster and becomes a visitor. Named visitors lose the power to frighten from behind the door. Then locate a value that transcends it. Every suffering points to something that matters. If ingratitude hurts, the value is loyalty. If indifference hurts, the value is care. If injustice hurts, the value is dignity. If invisibility hurts, the value is recognition. Value doesn't cancel the pain, it illuminates it. Finally, allow that value to breathe in your schedule through a small, verifiable commitment. Small so it fits, verifiable so it's embodied. A phone call made with presence, a paragraph written with care, a meal prepared with tenderness, a hard conversation sustained with respect. When value enters the body of the day, anxiety loses ground. Some people ask whether this is too little for big pains. What is little? when it carries truth, isn't little, it's a seed. The seed looks small, but it contains a tree. The tree doesn't grow in a day, and yet it begins to grow the day the seed finds soil. The daily micro-commitment functions like that soil. It doesn't solve everything, but it sustains the roots. With each gesture, the mind learns a new association. When fear tightens, I remember my value and move toward it. Repetition draws an inner track. Over time, the automatic reaction loses exclusivity and a chosen response appears. In the midst of this, practical spirituality does its discreet work. It doesn't need a special setting. It only asks for the willingness to open a listening space and let subtle consciousness blow the value's direction. Some call it prayer, others a pause, others the quiet that knows. The name matters less than the experience of perceiving that the heart has its own ways of pointing the way. When a person aligns with that pointing, a kind of unshowy peace appears. It isn't the peace of absence of challenges, it's the peace of someone who knows why they are walking, even if their feet still hurt. Perhaps until now, life has been conducted by urgencies coming from outside, messages that demand immediate replies, expectations that never end, comparisons that wear you out. Upon recognizing what life asks of today, a gentle shift occurs. External urgency loses command status, and inner priority, founded on value, gains place. The schedule remains full, but meaning breathes again within it. The same work carries a different specific weight when it's offered as contribution, not mere survival. The same home changes climate when everyday care is recognized as a work. The same relationship matures when the encounter becomes a silent mission to honor who you are and who the other is. It's common for the mind used to noise to mistrust this path. It asks for the perfect plan, the complete map, the guarantee of not erring. Mission answers with a sober gesture. There is no way to know everything. There is a way to respond well to what presents itself. And to respond well, in Frankl's sense, is not to settle, it's to commit. Commit to the part that is yours, to the value that seeks expression, to the small that prepares the great without calling attention to itself. When this commitment repeats, anxiety doesn't need to disappear for life to begin again. It takes its place in a larger scene, and from that place no longer governs. At a certain point, you notice that the question, "What is life asking of me today?" enables others. Who needs my presence now? What creation is asking for my hands? What choice honors my value without violating the others? These questions act like tracks that multiply, and when tracks spread, the engine finds roots. The power that once turned into noise becomes offering. The heart that once beat in alarm finds cadence. The mind that once collected threat scenarios learns to recognize opportunities for meaning, not because everything got easy, but because the foundation changed. In the end, anxiety is an engine without direction. Mission is track. Direction is born when pain has a name, when value is remembered, when a possible commitment receives a place in real life. This is how the emptiness nibbling at the edges loses its appetite. This is how urgency that ran you over becomes energy that sustains. And in that sustenance, a new chapter begins, not as spectacle, but as daily fidelity to what matters. The world's noise continues, the clock continues, demands continue, yet the inner listening is no longer orphaned. The track is laid, and the engine at last finds a way. When life tightens, the world seems to narrow the walls around the chest. There are days when news, bills, routine, and uncertainties form a chorus telling you who you are: tired, late, lacking, small. This feeling of powerlessness, which often settles in silently, gives the impression that circumstances have the final word on your identity. Inside, a weariness is born that isn't just physical. It's the exhaustion of carrying definitions that came from outside. The body reacts, the jaw tenses, the breath rises high in the chest, the shoulders rise half a centimeter and don't come down. In this setting, freedom seems like a distant luxury, like a sky seen through too small a window. There's a seductive idea circulating in our imagination. Freedom would be having no limits, being able to do everything, a wide open field with no fences. Tempting as it is, that image often disappoints. Life, in its real texture, includes boundaries: age, illnesses, contracts, responsibilities, bonds, losses. Frankl, shaped by limit experiences, points another direction with serenity. Freedom isn't the absence of walls. It's the possibility of choosing your response even in front of walls. That shift changes the soul's center of gravity. Instead of hunting for a scenario without restrictions, a scenario that rarely exists, you cultivate the intimate sovereignty that decides the posture. A person may not control the walls, but there is space between them. Small at times, real always. Controlling everything, however desirable it seems, is an expensive fantasy. The body pays for it with anxiety and exhaustion. The mind, attempting to anticipate every risk, spends too much energy on what isn't within reach. When the illusion falls, something truer can be born: the choice of attitude. The choice doesn't eliminate difficulty, but it returns dignity. Because in choosing your attitude, you regain authorship over what matters most, the meaning of your actions. There is loss, there are limits, there is pain, and still there is a way of responding that preserves values, honors bonds, and sustains your own conscience. That is the real power Frankl speaks of. Power not as domination, but as presence that decides. Between what arrives to you and what leaves you, there is an interval, sometimes imperceptible, sometimes millimetric, yet decisive. In that interval lives spiritual and emotional freedom. When the stimulus hits, the criticism, the news, the painful memory, the other's relapse, the unexpected, your body tends to fire old patterns. However, by recognizing the interval, you have a chance to name the value you wish to honor and align your response with it. Emotional neuroscience describes this instant as a point where the system can interrupt autopilot and engage circuits of awareness and regulation. Practical spirituality calls it sacred space, the quiet place where the soul remembers what it is. This interval takes shape when your breath slows the rush of reflex. Counting mentally, 5 long exhalations creates a hallway of passage between impulse and choice. While the air circulates, you can recall the guiding value you want to keep alive: respect, truth, care, courage, justice, mercy. When pronounced inwardly, the name of the value functions like a compass laid on the table. From there, the response finds another tone. The same content can be spoken without wounding. The same boundary can be set without humiliating. The same pain can be acknowledged without turning the other into an enemy. This isn't theater. It's coherence embodied in voice, gesture, and gaze. Constant practice of this interval transforms the inner landscape. Over time, the nervous system learns there is choice, and the feeling of confinement gives way to a kind of habitable space. The day remains demanding, the bills remain, the news doesn't stop, yet you're no longer molded by what happens. You mold your response. That's how small liberations are born, by choosing silence instead of explosion, firmness instead of aggression, truth instead of convenience, care instead of revenge. Each choice is a brick in the construction of a freedom no one can confiscate because it doesn't depend on external permission. There is a scene that translates this idea well. Imagine a cage. The iron is real, the limit is real, the cold of the metal is real. Yet between one bar and another, there is a space. Small, thin, almost unnoticed. That's where light enters. That's where air circulates. That's where the hand finds warmth when it touches the beam of light on the floor. The response lives in that space. When you learn to live from the inside out, the bar stops being a sentence and becomes a frame. The world may remain narrow on the outside, but inside you discover an amplitude you hadn't noticed. That amplitude doesn't come from denying reality. It comes from responding to it with value. The maturity of this path usually appears in the routine, not in epic scenes. In the conversation where the tone threatened to rise, a pause appears that allows you to hear the intention behind the words. At work where injustice hurt, you choose to defend what's right without wounding the dignity of the one who erred. At home, where overload screams, you choose to ask for help without turning the request into accusation. In all these moments, freedom shows up as voluntary responsibility, and responsibility here doesn't weigh. It sustains. It sustains the person in the place where they choose to exist. It's common for old habits to argue that this is weakness, that true freedom would be saying it straight, giving as good as you get, showing who's boss. That noisy logic collects momentary victories and deep defeats, because in the end, those who shout outward are often defending against an inner fear. The kind of freedom we're talking about doesn't look like a shout. It looks like clarity. Clarity doesn't humiliate, doesn't trample, doesn't disguise itself. Clarity is a gaze that holds the truth and at the same time preserves what is human. It's a no that respects. It's a yes that commits. It's the courage to respond without losing yourself. Little by little, you realize that the most important question before each event is not, how do I control this? But how can I respond without betraying who I am? That question returns the steering wheel of the soul to its rightful place. Life continues with its curves, but the wheel is in the hands of the one who drives from within. And from that place, even a bumpy road carries another meaning. The body understands, the heart rests, the mind finds fewer enemies and more choices. Freedom then stops being an abstract dream and becomes a daily gesture. In the end, even in cages, there is space between the bars. There dwells the response. That space is small, but it is enough for an entire light. Through it, dignity enters, value ignites, and attitude finds form. And when attitude aligns with what is highest, no crisis can hijack freedom. Because however tightly the world presses, your response remains yours. There are wounds that make no fuss. They simply return. They return with different faces, different times, different scenes, but they are recognized by the same taste at the back of the mouth, the same tension in the back, the same phrase gliding through thoughts, not again. When repetition becomes routine, the heart learns to protect itself with a silent armor. Cynicism arrives slowly, like someone offering a blanket on a cold night, and without noticing, you begin to look at the world with raised eyebrows and withdrawn affections. It's a weariness of believing, a fatigue of expecting something good, a prudence that isn't wisdom, but fear in disguise. Behind that protection, there is a pain that hasn't yet found a place, and until it finds one, it spills over by repetition. The belief that to overcome is to erase the memory often forces a forgetting that doesn't heal. Logotherapy offers another perspective. To overcome as transfigure, as giving pain a function, as placing it at the service of something larger than the suffering itself. It isn't sugarcoating or romanticizing tragedy. It's recognizing that the human heart has resources of meaning capable of transforming weight into direction. In that movement, the wound stops being a bottomless abyss and becomes a passage. The passage doesn't shorten distance, but it points to a possible way through the distance. There is dignity in this gesture, the dignity of someone who doesn't deny the scar, and precisely by not denying it, decides it need not govern the destination. In many accounts, recurring pain ends up revealing a value that will not accept negotiation. Repeated abandonment denounces a thirst for loyalty. Repeated humiliation cries out for dignity. Repeated invisibility lights the value of recognition. Repeated injustice invokes justice. Repeated loss reminds us of the preciousness of care. When it appears, value organizes meaning like a constellation organizes the traveler's gaze. It doesn't automatically heal, it doesn't close the past, but it offers an axis. And when that axis is honored, it begins to indicate not only how to live, but how to contribute. Contribution doesn't begin as an inflated mission, it begins humbly, with the name of service. There is a path that in certain lives draws itself as a map of calling, not calling as a glamorous profession, but calling as fidelity to the value the wound revealed. Those wounded in their voice may become guardians of conversations that return voice. Those wounded by indifference may become presences that do not fail. Those wounded by injustice may become quiet agents of equity in the small agreements of everyday life. It isn't a sealed destiny, it is a direction offered. And when that direction repeats in small choices, life begins to acquire the contour of meaning that resists the winds. The call inscribed in wound value service needs no spectacle. Identifying the central pain can happen on an ordinary afternoon, when an old memory touches the skin with the same temperature as years before, and instead of pushing it away, you have the willingness to listen to it for a few moments. Naming the betrayed value can be born from a simple sentence said inwardly. What hurt here was lack of loyalty. What burns here is disregard. What breaks here is injustice. From that naming, ethical imagination begins to work, and service takes shape in the real, a mending attitude, a care that sustains, a commitment that warms. Small, constant, true. Emotional neuroscience helps us understand why this path has power. When the mind assigns meaning to difficult experiences and couples that meaning with coherent actions, the system converges, disarms hypervigilance, and gives the body a safety script based on intention, not control. The past doesn't change, but the story stops being a collection of wounds and becomes a weave where pain has place and function. In terms of memory, networks reorganize. In terms of feeling, resentment loses range. In terms of spirituality, a quiet peace emerges that doesn't depend on amnesia but on offering time, talent, care, presence. In families, friendships, and workplaces, this transfiguration becomes visible in discrete ways. The person who felt ignored for years becomes the first to notice the subtle signs of someone silent at the table and decides to make space for another voice to appear. The one who was judged harshly begins to practice a listening that doesn't humiliate, and in that listening creates an environment where the truth can be spoken without fear. The one who lost repeatedly learns to celebrate what remains, and that gaze, which recognizes the small miracles of daily life, changes the house's climate. None of this erases the marks, but it allows work to be born over the marks. At times, inner skepticism tries to interrupt the process with the argument that this doesn't change what happened. It's true. It doesn't, and yet it changes how what happened inhabits the present. The inner home, once occupied by a memory that seized every room, gains new divisions. The past stays in the place of the past. The present becomes a dwelling again. You recover the capacity to offer your best without denying the worst you lived. This reconciliation with your own story creates humility, not the humility that diminishes itself, but the humility that aligns. And those who align with their value begin to radiate a kind of silent authority, the kind that doesn't need to prove anything, only to serve. At the heart of this path, practical spirituality shows up as breath. There is a wisdom that whispers in the interval between a painful memory and the decision to offer something good to the world. That whisper makes no noise, but it illuminates. It is like a lantern lit inside, pointing to a possible gesture, a care that fits, a presence that sustains. You notice that your own pain, when honored, builds a bridge to the pain of others, and that bridge shortens distances. The encounter born from this doesn't save the world, but it saves the moment. And moments saved, added up, change destinies. The same opening through which the night entered can be the aperture through which a lighthouse is born. The night doesn't cease to exist, but it gains a horizon. The lighthouse doesn't dissipate every shadow, but it offers a reliable reference for crossings. When the wound becomes direction, life doesn't become immune to storms, yet it no longer goes without a north, and with a north, even small steps gain a discreet majesty. Vocation then appears as this light that time after time chooses to serve. And serving in this context isn't submission, it's the expression of what is most true. It's the response that turns scar into path. It's the response that turns loss into presence. It's the response that quietly returns destiny to the heart. There are nights when the soul reaches for anything that promises immediate rest. One more dessert, an endless scroll of screens, one episode after another, a purchase that arrives in 2 days and fades in 2 minutes of enthusiasm. Relief comes fast, and it's honest to admit it helps for a few moments. Only when the effect passes, something feels emptier than before. The body is heavier, the house fuller, the mind noisier, and at the bottom of the chest, that old question remains there, staring steadily. What value did you abandon? This quiet cycle of compensations doesn't denounce moral weakness. It reveals the human attempt to protect ourselves from pain when meaning feels far away. It's human, understandable, common, and yet, when it becomes a habit, it impoverishes the heart. Confusion between pleasure and fulfillment is born from an enchanted expectation, believing that the shine of an instant can sustain the light of days. Pleasure, in itself, is legitimate. The problem starts when it occupies the place of foundation. Frankl distinguishes the will to meaning from the will to pleasure with a clarity that doesn't shame. The will to pleasure seeks the discharge that calms, chases waves of well-being that pass. The will to meaning organizes life around values that remain. Pleasure is weather, meaning is weather and season. The weather changes, the season sustains. When we expect pleasure to do the work of meaning, frustration shows up with the face of boredom, and emptiness grows quietly like mold on a damp wall. There's a discovery that transforms the quality of the day. True pleasure often visits houses where value lives, not value proclaimed, but value practiced. When action aligns with what is highest, a denser satisfaction begins to appear discreetly and resiliently. It isn't euphoria, it's calm fullness. It's the good tiredness of those who created something honestly, the quiet of those who contributed what they believe, the serenity of those who cared without expecting an audience. Pleasure then ceases to be an escape and becomes a consequence. It comes later, as if thanking the table for having been invited into a home where truth was served. In the body, that difference has a smell and a temperature. Compensation usually leaves a trail of agitation, light sleep, quick regret, a mind returning to the starting point. Coherence leaves a trail of settling, longer breathing, shoulders that drop, a gaze that doesn't need to explain itself. Emotional neuroscience suggests the nervous system recognizes safety when intention repeats impossible gestures, and consistent repetition lights networks that favor stable well-being, not passing peaks. The heart is grateful for this kind of nourishment. It is an ancient hunger for maturity that, when met, diminishes the need for anesthesia. In daily life, small scenes show this contrast with delicacy. There is a difference between buying something to silence a restlessness and building something that answers a value, between consuming content to escape an uncomfortable silence and offering presence to someone who needs listening, between seeking distraction to avoid feeling and allowing a named feeling to point to a necessary care. There is no heroism here. There is ethical precision, and ethical precision has a curious effect. It returns to time a taste of purpose that had been lost. The same coffee prepared with attention gains a new density. The same report written with caprice seems to say something it didn't say before. The same conversation, when crossed by respect, creates a climate of repair where there used to be only function. The suggestion to reduce compensations a little and fill the open space with acts of value, contribute, create, care, appears as a simple map for a heart tired of peaks and valleys. The exact number matters less than the gesture that inspires it. Reduce a little, not everything. Trade a little, not become someone you are not. Make room for value to walk, not for guilt to command. Over some days, this gentle shift can illuminate something precious. Life doesn't go gray when excess stimulus decreases. It recovers color when value takes a place of honor. A quiet joy appears, the kind that lasts longer than the shiny package. Practical spirituality recognizes that pleasure has a beautiful place when it is born as a response to gratitude, not as an attempt to silence discomfort. Gratitude for the food that sustains and the bread that is shared. Gratitude for the body that is still learning. Gratitude for the presence of those who stayed. Gratitude for the chance to start again from the possible point. Gratitude changes the vibration of the gesture. The same movie at night, when watched as a celebration of a day lived truthfully, tastes different from the movie watched to bury what you avoided facing. The content is identical, the meaning is different, and the body notices. In affective life, this shift from pleasure to meaning produces cleaner encounters. Relationships stop being anesthesia for loneliness and become places for maturity and care. Touch when it happens carries presence. The word when it comes carries commitment. Silence when it arrives carries rest. This isn't moral rigidity, it's responsible delicacy. And responsible delicacy is an antidote to the haste that confuses intimacy with consumption. In the end, emotional painkillers lower the fever, but don't cure the infection of an abandoned value. The fever drops, life thanks for a few minutes, the body almost believes it passed. Yet if the value remains forgotten, the infection returns, sometimes deeper. When value is found again and fed in simple actions, contribute, create, care, healing doesn't set off fireworks, it matures. Pleasure remains, but as the fruit of a rooted tree, and the fruit of a rooted tree nourishes, perfumes, and delights without charging the cost of escape. This is how the search for relief stops sabotaging, overcoming, and becomes a consequence of a life that finally knows why it exists. There are seasons when the world seems to measure worth with a tape of applause. Whatever shines becomes the ruler. Whatever yields likes becomes proof. Whatever makes noise gains the name of greatness. Meanwhile, quiet gestures go without a headline. Food that appears on the table on time, sheets that smell like rest, a word that avoids a wound, a report that arrives clean, honesty that doesn't negotiate details, presence that doesn't abandon. In days of involuntary comparison, ordinary life can feel small, almost unimportant, as if existence needed an epic script to deserve respect. The hidden pain is born there, a discreet devaluing of one's own story, not because it is poor, but because your gaze has been trained to recognize spectacle and has forgotten how to recognize fidelity. The image of purpose as a stage tires because it turns meaning into performance. Suddenly, everything needs an audience, a slogan, a narrative ready to be shared. Logotherapy whispers something else. Meaning is found in tasks that are discreet and faithful. Discreet because they don't demand spotlights. Faithful because they persist when no one is watching. This fidelity has the texture of ground and the smell of home. It doesn't enchant by excess. It sustains by consistency. Instead of living in pursuit of memorable scenes, you begin to perceive beauty in keeping a small flame lit, yet constant. When the heart finds that cadence, it settles in a way fame can't offer. The revelation has a simple, profound face. A masterpiece can be an invisible act of care, an honest decision, a job well done. An invisible care quietly saves entire mornings. An honest decision rearranges destinies without fanfare. A job well done sustains trust for years. In these places, greatness isn't measured by reach, but by density of presence, of commitment, of truth. It's the kind of greatness that leaves a climate in the air, like when a home suddenly feels more breathable and you can't quite say why. The body notices, shoulders a little lower, the jaw less tight, a gaze that finds the ground. Quiet greatness works like a balm. From the nervous system's point of view, this cadence works discrete miracles. The relentless hunt for novelty and stimulus spikes creates a cycle of agitation that promises much and delivers little rest. Deep engagement with tasks that carry value stabilizes rhythms, fosters states of presence, and strengthens circuits of sustained attention. It isn't about demonizing the new, but about recognizing that the soul matures when it learns to sip the everyday without haste, like someone savoring fruit at the right time. Practical spirituality speaks tenderly with this science. The sacred often visits the common, and when it does, it turns the common into a place of encounter, not escape. In real stories, this greatness shows up with faces seldom seen. A woman makes coffee before sunrise, not from blind obligation, but because a quiet vow of care rests there. A man closes the spreadsheet at day's end with rigor and kindness, and without noticing, guarantees calm for the entire team. A daughter cleans her sick father's room, and without a speech, honors the dignity she learned from him. A teacher corrects 100 papers, one by one, and every note carries the hope that a well-placed word can open a world. These are scenes without fireworks, but they keep the city's inner lights on. On this horizon, recognizing among so many activities 3 gestures that already embody beloved values: generosity, courage, honesty, loyalty, care, beauty, casts light. It isn't a demand to become someone else. It's a recognition of who you already are when you are present. And as you double down on these gestures over days, the inner house confirms a decisive message. What gives meaning doesn't depend on an audience, it depends on coherence. Coherence that repeats slowly, almost invisibly, yet repeated, becomes architecture. The greatness of the ordinary also protects against the illusion of comparison. When your gaze learns to see value in what is faithful, the feed loses its power to judge your life. The image of the other stops being a sentence and becomes just an image. No one needs to prove greatness to those who recognize greatness in what endures. It's like taking the microphone away from anxiety and giving the floor back to conscience. Conscience remembers that dignity isn't measured in likes. It's measured in loyalty to what you believe, especially when nothing invites you to it. Some say this view is conformism. On the contrary, it's silent subversion. Conformism is repeating the emptiness of shine for shine's sake. Subversion is choosing value when no one is watching. That choice changes the climate of a street, an office, a family. An entire neighborhood can transform when the ordinary is done with decency. The bus that waits 2 minutes for the person running, the cashier who calls you by name, the neighbor who notices the gate ajar and closes it with care, the doctor who explains again without hurry, the artisan who redoes the stitch until it's right. Details that don't make speeches, but build a world. It isn't the spotlight that makes the scene. It's the actor's integrity when no one is watching. Integrity isn't rigidity. It's coherence at the service of life. The light that matters is born from the meeting of intention and gesture, value and practice, word, and the silence that sustains it. When that meeting becomes habit, the ordinary day gains the thickness of destiny. You realize that even without epic moments, you are living something larger than yourself, the story of a character being formed. In the body, confirmation comes as legitimate rest. Rest not as escape, but as gathering after offering the best possible within reach. Sleep arrives with less noise. Food tastes different. The home breathes lighter. The mind needs less distraction. The heart becomes less needy of proofs. Pleasure, when it appears, finds a place at a table set by gratitude, and gratitude, when it appears, reminds you that nothing that sustains life is too small to be celebrated. With time, seeing the ordinary as an altar changes your relationship with your dreams. They don't disappear, they mature. Big projects, long crossings, extensive creations still exist. The difference is that now the dreams don't rival real life, they feed on it. Each small fidelity builds the muscle that sustains healthy ambition, and when, at last, something greater happens, It won't arrive like an invasion that rips out roots, but like the flowering of a tree that was watered every day at simple hours by hands without a spotlight. In the final quiet of this part, the image remains of a kitchen at daybreak. Light steam rising from a cup, shy brightness coming through the window, a pair of hands moving with care. There is no catchphrase, no audience, no urgency, and yet everything there breathes meaning. Because when meaning finds a place in the ordinary, it creates a ground that doesn't wobble with the wind. And from that ground spring the silent turns that change everything inside, preparing the soil for the crossing that comes next. Some days begin much the same. The alarm rings, the same cup, the same commute, the same conversations repeated with people who also repeat their weariness. The landscape seems deaf to requests. The calendar offers no last-minute miracles. Deadlines remain. The body carries lightnesses and weights with the same discipline. Frustration is born in this terrain of apparent stagnation, as if the world had closed its windows and air had to be made from within. It isn't drama, it's painful lucidity. There are changes that simply don't fit in the short term, doors that won't open today, people who won't change now. In that realization, the heart can harden, or it can, delicately, look for another way to breathe. The expectation that meaning depends on the setting creates an elegant trap. It seems reasonable to imagine that a new city, a new job, new company, or a new phase would by themselves bring the missing meaning. Sometimes they bring a necessary breeze. Often they offer only different landscapes for old questions. Frankl points to a more intimate sovereignty. When attitude aligns with a value, the inevitable need not steal meaning. The setting can remain difficult, and yet the experience changes density, not by magic, but by inner governance. To govern here isn't to control the wind, it's to set the sail, and a well-set sail makes use of winds you didn't choose. The turn happens when the why migrates from a whim of circumstances to a commitment of conscience. The same task gains another vibration when it serves a value, not a fear. The same care once felt as obligation reveals a kind of altar when it connects to loyalty, tenderness, gratitude. The same silence which once felt like abandonment can become listening ground when you offer presence from within. Reconfiguring the why changes the how, and when the how matures, the day, without changing clothes, wears a different skin. Emotional neuroscience locates this movement in the discrete folds of the nervous system. When you assign purpose to a possible gesture, attention organizes. The body recognizes predictability, the vagal axis finds cadence, the mind stops ruminating unreachable futures and invests energy in what is real. This circuit shift doesn't promise euphoria, it offers consistency. Consistency is that kind of peace that doesn't need an announcement. It simply settles in like someone pulling up a chair for an old friend. Practical spirituality calls this fidelity to the instant, where the sacred allows itself to be noticed without spectacle. In homes where almost nothing seems to change, stories of quiet transformation often grow. One person cares for an elder for months, maybe years, and discovers that the routine of medicines, baths, and meals holds a pedagogy of love no lecture teaches. Another persists in honest work while reorienting their presence, and notices that dignity isn't tied to a title, it's tied to character. Someone crosses a long grief and, in the repetition of days, finds small spaces for beauty. A plant that sprouts, a notebook that receives a sentence, a window that returns a sky. None of this changes the headlines. It changes the climate within. Which value can I honor today, even if nothing changes? Arises like a golden thread passed through wooden beads. Life continues with the smell it has, with the bills it has, with the mishaps it has, and yet that thread stitches the hours one by one. By naming a value and translating it into a verifiable gesture, the day ends carrying the signature of the one who lived it. Not a signature to display, but so your own conscience recognizes the territory you occupied. When the signature repeats, it lays track. Track doesn't hurry the train. but it keeps it from getting lost. The river metaphor helps you see the discrete and forceful scale of this turn. Shifting the spring by millimeters may seem irrelevant to those who measure everything in short deadlines. However, miles downstream, the course no longer passes through the same valley. The external map may take time to register the change. The body walking the bank notices early. The weight on your shoulders rearranges, priorities breathe, speech chooses words with different care. The gaze finds steps where before it saw walls. A spring, being a spring, doesn't fight the stones. It bends around them, insists, learns to be away. In relationships that seem suspended in the same dispute, shifting the why also brings relief. By honoring respect, conversation trades speed for depth. By honoring courage, truth gains the shape of a bridge. By honoring compassion, judgment lowers its voice and opens space for shared responsibility. None of this guarantees an immediate happy ending, but it guarantees that the encounter leaves fewer invisible scars. And each time a value sustains a dialogue, the chance grows that one day the setting will follow the inner change. At work, the same logic offers ground. Projects that don't move, recognition that arrives late, structures slow to renew often wear you out. Still, when quiet excellence becomes a commitment, the craft finds dignity of its own. The weariness doesn't disappear, but it ceases to be the only narrator. Another narrator appears by its side, older, telling the story of care for detail, of loyalty to what you deliver, of rectitude kept when no one is watching. This narrator doesn't use a megaphone, but its account persists, and persistence, little by little, draws reality. When nearly nothing changes outside, one turn changes everything inside. Not the spectacular turn that makes headlines, but the intimate turn that repositions the spring. Millimeters of decision in the heart, millimeters of value in the voice, millimeters of dignity in the gesture, and miles ahead, another landscape emerges. The same street seems wider, the same task finds another music, the same life, faithful to its limits, reveals amplitude. The river's course alters when the spring moves a little. Existence alters when meaning returns to guide. In this almost invisible adjustment, the soul finds the course it waited for, and the world, though it may not know, breathes a little better. The music tunes itself to the silence, and the room gains the texture of a calm, late afternoon. The body, having crossed so many images and questions, begins to gather the day's loose ends. A simple sequence presents itself as if offering a place at the table. First, posture finds dignity without effort. Spine lengthening gently, jaw relaxing a millimeter, shoulders remembering the way back down. Then the breath adopts a tempo that welcomes the nervous system. 4 counts to receive, 4 to hold, 6 to return. 3 cycles are enough for the inner house to feel the invitation of safety. The heart slows a little, the mind takes off its shoes, presence sits down. As air circulates, imagination opens the window of the brightest room. In the first person, a scene appears of tomorrow, being guided by the highest value named along the journey. You see yourself arriving at the same setting as always, but with the compass lit, the gesture that honors loyalty, the word that carries care, the silence that protects truth, the boundary that preserves dignity. The scene doesn't ask for grandiosity, it asks for coherence. In this sober visualization, the body rehearses on the inside what the soul has already chosen, and biology learns to recognize the way as a way. Neuroplasticity at the service of the sacred every day. The verifiable micro-gesture gains contour like a discrete signature in the corner of the page. A phone call made with presence, a text finished with honesty, a care that finds its hour. A no spoken with respect. There is no haste in this image, only clarity. Clarity is enough for the system to find track and the heart to recognize the ground. Next, gratitude raises its head like someone recalling an old song. Gratitude for the body that carried, for the time that was possible, for the people who stayed, for the learning offered, for the chance, even if small, to begin again. Gratitude's frequency rewrites reality because it teaches the gaze to read the world without erasing pain and yet to discover lines of meaning between the margins. The sentences that accompanied the entire crossing now land like a shawl over your shoulders. You are not broken. You are in transformation. It isn't what happens outside, it's what vibrates inside. Your biology responds to your spirituality. The house that stood through the storm finds warmth. The heart understands without speeches. What is of value remains. What remains sustains. And what sustains can be repeated gently tomorrow. Even in the deepest darkness, the light of meaning can be found. Life never becomes unbearable because of circumstance, but because of lack of meaning and purpose. The presence consolidated here doesn't promise shortcuts, it offers direction. Direction doesn't erase the night, it lights a beacon at the cliff's edge. In this humble brightness, the next day gains the thickness of destiny. And before what still hurts, the question remains, a quiet portal. What if the pain you feel today is the doorway to the meaning you've always sought?